Mama! Mama, wake up! Please, Mama, wake up! Lena didn't move. She lay face up in the snow, one arm stretched behind her, the other pressed flat against her swollen belly. Her coat, a thin green thing that had never been designed for a storm like this, was already dusted white. Her lips had gone from pale to the faint blue that came when a body started making decisions about what it could and could not afford to keep warm. Her dark hair fanned out beneath her head like ink spilling across a page, the only color left in a world that had gone entirely colorless. The little girl's scream tore through the howling wind like a blade. It was raw, desperate, and utterly alone, the kind of scream that doesn't come from fear of the dark or a bump in the night. It came from a child who understood, at 5 years old, that something was terribly, permanently wrong. Emily stood knee-deep in snow that had no business being this deep, this early in winter, and she screamed her mother's name into the white void until her throat cracked and her voice broke apart, and the wind swallowed every syllable whole. The blizzard screamed. Emily screamed back. She grabbed her mother's arm with both hands, the kind of grip that was all knuckle and raw determination, and she pulled. She was 5. She weighed 42 pounds. Lena weighed infinitely more than that, heavy with a child who was due in 6 weeks, and Emily pulled anyway, because what else was there to do? What else had there ever been to do but hold on and pull? The road behind them was empty. Jack had been gone for 11 minutes. Emily knew this because she had counted. She had stood in the ruts his tires left in the snow, and she had counted every second from 1 to 60, 11 times, because she thought maybe if she counted long enough, the headlights would come back. They hadn't. The road was a blank white scar cutting through pine trees that bent and groaned under the weight of ice, and there was no sound anywhere that wasn't the storm. Nobody knew they were here. Nobody was coming. Except that wasn't true. Half a mile up the road, moving slowly through the whiteout conditions, a convoy of 3 black SUVs crept along at 15 miles per hour. The lead driver had cut speed twice already, once for visibility and once for a patch of black ice that had nearly sent $40,000 of armored vehicle into the tree line. The men inside were tense and quiet and very, very armed. The man in the back seat of the middle vehicle had not spoken in 20 minutes. Antonio Reyes was not a man who needed to fill silence. He was 41 years old, built like the architecture of old buildings, solid and cold, and designed to withstand things, with dark eyes set under a heavy brow and a jaw that looks like it had been cut rather than grown. His hands rested on his knees, perfectly still. He was watching the snow move across the window with the flat, unreadable attention of someone doing calculations that had nothing to do with weather. He was not a good man. He had never claimed to be. The people who worked for him knew exactly who he was, and they had chosen accordingly, and the arrangement had functioned with a brutal, efficient clarity for over a decade. He ran a criminal organization that operated in 7 states. He had ordered things done that could not be undone. He had sat in rooms and made decisions that had sent people to hospitals and graves and federal holding cells, and he had done all of this without losing sleep, because sleep, like sentiment, was a vulnerability. He was not thinking about any of that right now. He was thinking about the meeting he'd just come from and the particular kind of loose end it had created, and how loose ends left untended had a habit of becoming ropes. He was mapping the problem the way he mapped every problem, clinically, from all sides, looking for the angle that produced the cleanest resolution. Then his lead driver's voice came through the earpiece. "Boss, you need to see this." Antonio looked up from the window. Through the headlights of the front vehicle, the snow caught and scattered in every direction, and as the scatter, at the very edge of the light, there was a shape that shouldn't have been there. 2 shapes. One larger, one very small. "Stop," Antonio said. The convoy stopped. He was out of the vehicle before Marcos, his head of security, could move. The cold hit him like something with intention, not weather, but judgment, the kind of cold that meant business. He walked forward into the headlight beams, and the wind threw snow into his face, and he ignored it completely because what he was seeing made every other sensation irrelevant. A woman, pregnant, down in the snow. A little girl standing over her, screaming. Antonio crossed the distance between him and them at a pace that was not quite running because Antonio Reyes did not run, but was something very close to it. He dropped to one knee beside the woman and touched 2 fingers to her throat and felt a pulse that was there, but thin, a thread of something that hadn't yet decided to give up. He looked at the little girl. She stared back at him with enormous brown eyes. Her face was red from the cold and tracked with frozen tears, and she had a particular stillness of a child who has been very frightened for a long time and has used up all the fear and arrived somewhere past it. She had a small purple hat pulled down over her ears and mittens that matched, and she was holding her mother's hand in both of hers. "Is she your mama?" Antonio asked. Emily nodded.
"What's her name?" "Lena. Her name is Lena." The child's voice was steady in a way that was almost alarming. "She fell down and she won't wake up, and my daddy drove away, and I don't know what to do." Antonio looked at the road, at the tire tracks already disappearing under fresh snow. He looked back at the woman, Lena, and then at the child again, and he did the thing that very few people ever saw Antonio Reyes do, which was make a decision that had nothing to do with strategy or leverage or calculation. He gathered the woman up out of the snow. She was heavy and limp, and her head fell against his chest, and he stood with her like she weighed nothing and turned to Marcos, who had appeared at his shoulder with the expression of a man who had seen many things in his career, but was currently revising his assumptions. "Get the girl," Antonio said. "We're taking them." Marcos stared at him for exactly 1 second. "Gas?" "Now, Marcos." Marcos got the girl. They drove to the compound with the heat turned all the way up, and Emily sitting in the front seat of the lead vehicle with Marcos's jacket around her shoulders, methodically eating a protein bar someone had found in the glove compartment, watching the road like she expected her father to appear in the headlights at any moment. She didn't cry again. She'd already used those up. In the back seat, Antonio held Lena against him to keep her warm, one hand pressed flat against her belly when, somewhere in the dark between the abandoned road and the gate of his estate, he felt the baby move. He said nothing. He looked out the window. He didn't let go. The compound was not what most people imagined when they heard the word compound. It wasn't a bunker or a fortress, though it was certainly secure. It was a sprawling stone manor set back from the road behind a wall of old pines, with warm light in all the windows, and a staff of 8 who operated with the quiet efficiency of people who had long since learned not to ask questions they didn't need the answers to. Elena, the housekeeper, met them at the door. She took one look at the woman Antonio was carrying, at the small child behind him eating the last of a protein bar, and said, "Bedroom 3. I'll call Dr. Vasquez." "Now," Antonio confirmed. He carried Lena up the stairs himself. He put her down on the bed in the guest room with the same careful attention a person might give to setting down something fragile and valuable, and he stood back while Elena began removing wet clothing and pulling blankets up and doing the dozen competent things that needed doing. He watched until she looked at him over her shoulder and said, politely but firmly, "I have her, sir." He left. He found Emily in the hallway, standing with her back against the wall, her purple hat still on, the mittens now off and dangling from a clip on her coat zipper. She looked up at him. "Is my mama going to be okay?" she asked. He crouched down to her level. He was not accustomed to this angle on the world. Everything looked different from here, bigger, less contained, the edges less certain. "Yes," he said. And then, because the child was clearly not interested in reassurances that floated free of any foundation, he added, "A doctor is coming. She needs to get warm. She's going to be fine." Emily studied him with those dark eyes. "You're very big," she said. "I am. My daddy is big too, but not like you." She paused. "My daddy left us in the snow on purpose." Antonio said nothing. I counted after he drove away. I counted 60 seconds, 11 times. He didn't come back. No, he didn't. Are you going to leave us too? The question hit him somewhere he hadn't expected to have a target. He looked at this 5-year-old child in the hallway of his house, this small person who had been standing alone in a blizzard, counting seconds, and he felt something that was dormant in him for a long time shift in its sleep. No, he said. You're safe here. Emily considered this. She reached up and pulled off her hat, studied it for a moment, and put it back on. Okay, she said. Then, with the particular practicality of children who have no choice but to take adults at their word, I'm hungry. Antonio stood. Come with me. Dr. Vasquez arrived within the hour. He was the kind of doctor who did not appear on official payrolls, but who was discreet and thorough and had, on various occasions, kept Antonio's people out of hospitals where questions would have been asked. He examined Lena with quiet focus, ran the checks that needed running, listened to the baby's heartbeat with an expression that gradually relaxed from concern into something closer to relief. Hypothermia, mild, he told Antonio in the hallway. She's warming up. The baby is fine, strong heartbeat, no distress. She needs rest, fluids, warmth. She was lucky. She was found in time, Antonio said. It was a different thing. Yes, Dr. Vasquez looked at him. Do I want to know the circumstances? No, Antonio said. Then I'll leave instructions with Elena and come back in the morning. He left. Lena woke up at 3 a.m. She came back into consciousness the way people did when they'd been very cold, slowly, in layers, awareness arriving before understanding. She was warm. That was the first thing. Unimaginably, luxuriously warm, under blankets that were soft in a way that her blankets at home had never been, in a room she didn't recognize, with a lamp burning low on the bedside table. She sat up fast, and the room tilted, and she pressed both hands to her belly and felt the answering kick that meant, I'm here, we're here, everything is still here. Then she remembered. The car door slamming, Jack's face in the window, blank and cold and entirely done with her, the snow coming up to meet her, Emily screaming. Emily, she said, out loud, to no one. She's sleeping. The voice came from the chair in the corner. A man, sitting in the dark at the edge of the lamplight with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped between them. He was very large and very still, and he was watching her with dark eyes that gave nothing away. Lena grabbed the blanket and yanked it up, which was neither useful nor logical, given that she was fully dressed in warm clothes she didn't recognize, but fear made its own logic. Who are you? She asked. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. Where is my daughter? Emily is in the room next door. Elena, my housekeeper, is with her. She ate 2 bowls of soup and half a loaf of bread, and she is fine. He paused. My name is Antonio. You're at my estate. My men found you on the road. Lena stared at him. Why? He seemed to consider the question seriously, like it deserved a real answer rather than a polite deflection. Because you were in the snow and you needed to not be in the snow. She looked around the room. The furniture was heavy and expensive. The window showed darkness and the faint shapes of snow-covered grounds. There was no sound except the wind outside, and somewhere in the house, the deep, settled quiet of a well-built home. I need to call someone, she said. There's a phone on the table. She reached for it and then stopped, because the question that she'd been avoiding since the moment she opened her eyes finally forced itself to the front. Who would she call? Her mother was in Florida, 3 states away. Her friends, the ones she'd had before Jack, had been managed out of her life so gradually she hadn't noticed until they were gone. The women she'd met through Jack's social circles were Jack's women, not hers. She had an apartment she'd never been allowed to think of as her own, joint accounts she couldn't access without him, a life that had been so thoroughly colonized by another person's will that standing on its own, it revealed itself to be mostly scaffolding. She put the phone back down. Antonio watched her do this without comment. Your husband, he said. It wasn't a question, but it was an opening. Yes, she said. He left you there? Yes. You're 34 weeks pregnant. 6 weeks early, she agreed. Her voice was flat and factual. She had spent a long time making her voice flat and factual because the alternative was a register she couldn't afford. Antonio was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You'll stay until you're well enough to make other arrangements. The doctor will be back in the morning. You and your daughter are safe here." "You don't know me," Lena said. "No," he agreed. "I don't." "Why are you doing this?" He looked at her for a long moment, not in the way men had looked at her before, assessing, possessive, measuring, but in the way that people looked at problems they were genuinely trying to understand. "I'm not entirely sure," he said, and it sounded like it was the truth. He stood. He was even taller than she'd registered from across the room. "Sleep," he said. "We'll talk in the morning. You're safe." He left. Lena sat in the warm, expensive dark and pressed both hands to her belly and tried to remember the last time anyone had said that to her and meant it without wanting something in return. She couldn't. She lay back down and, for the first time in longer than she could track, she slept without listening for footsteps. If you've been watching since the beginning, please take a quick second right now to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and drop something in the comments. Tell us if you've ever experienced a moment where a complete stranger changed everything for you. It means the world, and it helps more people find these stories. We'll keep going. Morning came silver and quiet, the storm spent, the world outside laid out in white precision under a sky the color of old pewter. Emily found it first. She was at the window when Lena came into the room, pressing her nose against the glass and breathing fog onto the pane. "It stopped," Emily announced. "The snow stopped. There's a fountain out there, but it's frozen. Mama, there's a frozen fountain." Lena crossed the room and stood beside her daughter and looked out at the grounds, the long sweep of white lawn, the stone fountain at its center locked in ice, the dark geometry of the pine forest beyond the wall. It was objectively beautiful. It was also impossibly far from anything she knew. "How are you feeling?" she asked Emily. "Good." Emily turned from the window. She had slept in the borrowed clothes and her hair was going in 4 directions, and she looked entirely herself, which was the most reassuring thing Lena had seen in weeks. "The nice lady made eggs. Her name is Alina, like mine, but different. She said you could have breakfast when you woke up. She said to tell you not to rush." Lena almost laughed. "Did she?" "She's very organized," Emily said, with the serious approval of a 5-year-old who valued competence. They found the kitchen by following the smell of coffee. Antonio was already there, standing at the counter with a cup in his hand, reading something on his phone. He looked up when they came in. He looked at Lena first, a quick assessment, color in her face, steady on her feet, not holding the doorframe, and then at Emily, who marched in with full confidence and climbed onto the chair she had apparently already claimed as hers. "Good morning," Emily said. "Did you sleep good?" A pause. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Antonio's expression. "Well enough," he said. "I sleep really good here. The pillow is like a cloud, but heavier." Alina arrived with eggs and toast and juice, and the morning moved around them with the quiet efficiency of a household that knew how to function. And Lena sat across the kitchen table from the man who had pulled her out of the snow and watched her daughter eat with the focused dedication she brought to all meals and tried to figure out what was real. The doctor came after breakfast. He checked everything again, listened to the heartbeat, asked questions she answered honestly because at this point honesty seemed like the only resource she had left in any quantity. He told her the baby was fine, she was fine, she should rest and eat and not stress. She thanked him. He left. Antonio showed her to a sitting room, a room with tall windows and a fire already going and furniture arranged for actual use rather than display. He sat across from her. Between them was a low table with a coffee service Alina had put there without being asked. They looked at each other. "You can stay as long as you need. There are no conditions on that." There are always conditions, Lena said. Not this time. She studied him. He returned the look without flinching, without the subtle repositioning she'd learned to watch for in men who said one thing and meant another. He was still and direct and gave the impression of someone who had long since decided that pretense was a waste of energy. What do you do for work? The corner of his mouth moved. You want the honest answer or the one I give people I've just met? The honest one, she said. I've had enough of the other kind. I run an organization. It operates outside legal frameworks. I control territory and assets, and I manage people who are very good at things you don't want done to you. He paused. I am not a good man in the way you're probably hoping I am. Lena absorbed this. You're in the Mafia. That's a word civilians use, yes.
And you pulled a pregnant woman and her child out of a blizzard? Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment. The fire cracked. Somewhere in the house, Emily could be heard talking to Elena about the frozen fountain and whether fish could live under ice. I had a daughter, Antonio said. The room shifted. Had, Lena said. She died. She was 2 years old. It was an act of violence by men who wanted to make a point to me. He delivered this with the same flat precision with which she had told him about Jack leaving her in the snow, and she recognized the register because she used it herself. The voice you put on a thing when you've told it so many times that the telling has worn a groove and the words slide along it without catching anymore. I saw Emily in the snow and He stopped. Started again. I stopped. Lena looked at him for a long moment. I'm sorry, she said, about your daughter. I'm sorry about your husband, he said. She almost laughed. Then she almost cried. She did neither. His name is Jack. We've been married 6 years. It was good at first, or I thought it was good. I was 23 and I didn't know the difference between love and someone deciding you belong to them. She stopped. He hit me for the first time when I was pregnant with Emily. He said it would never happen again. It happened again. I kept thinking. She pressed her lips together. I kept thinking I could make it different, that I was the variable, that if I were better at being what he needed, he'd stop needing to do what he did. Antonio said nothing. He was watching her with an attention that wasn't pity. She would have bristled at pity, but something else, something more like witness. The look of someone who knew how long certain beliefs could survive in the dark. He drove me out there yesterday and told me I was a burden, she said, that the baby was a burden, that he was done, and he left us there. She breathed out slowly. I've been afraid of him for years, and then he left me in a blizzard and I thought I was going to die, and I realized I was more afraid of him finding us again than of dying in the snow. She looked up. What does that tell you? It tells me you've been surviving, Antonio said. Not living, surviving. Lena looked at him. You understand the difference? I spent 10 years not understanding the difference, he said, and then I lost my daughter and I understood it very well and it didn't matter anymore. What happens, if you don't mind? I mind some of it, he said, but I'll tell you the part that matters. He looked at the fire. Her name was Sophia. Her mother, my wife, we were not married, but she was everything. Her name was Kara. She was killed by a rival organization when Sophia was 14 months old. Sophia was in the car. She survived the attack. She died in the hospital 3 weeks later from complications. He stopped. The men who did it no longer exist. The fire. The quiet house. Emily's voice somewhere down the hall. I'm sorry, Lena said again. I built a wall around it and I kept going, he said. That's what you do. You keep going because the alternative is stopping, and stopping is a luxury I couldn't afford and wouldn't have wanted anyway. He looked back at her. Seeing you in the snow, seeing Emily standing over you like that, he shook his head very slightly. I don't do things without reasons. I've been trying to understand my reasons since last night. Maybe sometimes things just happen, Lena said. He looked at her like that was a novel idea he was willing to consider.
The days that followed had a texture she hadn't felt in years, not the coiled, waiting tension of her life with Jack, where every room had a weather system and she'd spent a decade reading barometric pressure in a man's shoulders, but something slower, something that had space in it. She healed. Her body, which had been burning resources it didn't have to keep herself and the baby alive, began to recover with the single-mindedness of biological systems when they finally had what they needed. She ate, she slept, she walked the long hallways of the manor and the grounds when the snow allowed, and Emily walked beside her or ran ahead or disappeared to find Elena, who had apparently adopted her as a project with the same energy she brought to managing a household. Antonio was there and not there. He had a life that happened in other rooms, phone calls conducted in low, flat tones, men coming and going at the gate with the purposeful quiet of people who only went places if there was a reason. She understood that she was living in the margins of a world with its own gravitational laws, and she was careful not to ask questions she didn't need the answers to. But in the evenings, sometimes they would end up in the same room. It started by accident. She came down for a glass of water one night, and he was in the study with a glass of whiskey and a fire and whatever weight the day had left him, and neither of them said much, and she sat in the armchair opposite him, and the silence between them had the quality of something neither of them wanted to break. She went back to bed an hour later and didn't know what to call what had just happened. It happens again the next night, and the night after that. "You don't sleep much," she said on the third night. "He sleeps when he needs to. That's different from sleeping." He looked at her. "Yes, it is. What are you thinking about when you sit here?"
A pause. "Tonight, I'm thinking about a meeting I had last month that created a problem I haven't fully resolved." He swirled the whiskey. "And I'm thinking about Sophia. I think about her every night. I've made my peace with that." "Do you talk to anyone about her?" "No," he said. "Not until recently." He didn't need to clarify when recently had started. She understood. "I have a therapist I saw twice," Lena said, "before Jack found out and told me I was making him look bad to people who knew our counselor and made me stop going." She paused. "I've thought a lot about those 2 sessions. They didn't fix anything, but they felt like being in a room where the walls weren't moving." "Stable," he said. "Yes, stable." She looked at the fire. "I haven't had much of that." "I can offer stable," he said, and then seemed to hear how that landed and added, with the careful precision of someone choosing words, "This house is stable. You're welcome to as much of it as you need." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're trying very hard not to make this into something it might become," she said. He was quiet. "I can see you doing it," she said. You're very careful about things." "I've made mistakes," he said, "by being careless." "So have I," she said. "I made a 7-year mistake by confusing someone's intensity for love." Jack, she breathed out. "He was so certain about everything, about me, about us. I thought certainty was the same as safety. It took me years to understand that his certainty had nothing to do with me at all. He was certain about his ownership, not about me." She stopped. "I keep thinking I should be angrier. I'm waiting for the anger, and mostly what I feel is tired, just incredibly tired." "The anger comes later," Antonio said, "when the survival instinct stands down enough to let it." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because I waited 2 years to feel anything about losing Kara," he said. "I was operational for 2 years, perfectly functional. And then one night, I was sitting in a room very much like this one, and I understood with complete clarity what I had lost. And He stopped. "I wasn't functional for a while after that." She looked at his hands. They were very still on the glass. "What brought you back?" she asked. "Work," he said. Then, eventually, understanding that being numb wasn't the same as being strong. That's a thing I had to learn twice. He looked at her. "You're stronger than you think you are, Lena. Standing in the snow with Emily, keeping yourself conscious long enough for someone to find you, that takes a strength that people who have only ever been comfortable don't understand." "I almost didn't," she said. "I almost didn't stay conscious." "But you did." She thought about Emily in the snow, calling her name.
about the frozen ground under her back and the dark coming at the edges. "She wouldn't let me go," Lena said. "That child has been keeping me here for 5 years." Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, the first break in the flat tone she'd been using, and she pulled it back. "I'm not going to cry in your study." "You can," he said. "I know. I'd rather not." He nodded. He understood that too. The mornings were the hardest for Lena, not because anything was wrong with them. They were, by the objective measure of everything she'd known for the past several years, objectively fine, but because after 6 years of waking up and immediately, before full consciousness, assessing the atmosphere of a room, the temperature of a marriage, the particular quality of silence that told you what kind of day was coming, she had no skills for waking up in safety. Her body didn't know what to do with the absence of threat. It kept taking its readings and coming back with nothing to act on, and the nothing was its own kind of disorienting. She talked to Alina about it one morning, standing in the kitchen while the coffee brewed, Emily still asleep down the hall. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," she said. Elena was folding towels with the methodical focus she brought to all tasks. She was a woman in her late 60s who had been with Antonio for 15 years and had, in that time, developed the particular equanimity of someone who had seen most things and reached her own conclusions about all of them. "That's normal," Elena said. "It doesn't feel normal. It feels like something is wrong with me."
"Nothing is wrong with you," Elena said. She set down the towel. "I came here from circumstances that were not what I chose. I spent the first 2 years waiting for the floor to fall. It takes time to trust that the floor stays." She paused. "The body remembers longer than the mind does. Give it time." Lena looked at her. "You came from something difficult." "Everyone has something difficult," Elena said. "The question is what you do on the other side of it." She picked up the towel again. "Eat your breakfast. The eggs are getting cold." Lena ate her eggs. She thought about what Elena had said for the rest of the morning, about the body remembering longer than the mind. She thought about all the things her body had been taught: how to be small in a doorway, how to keep her voice from trembling when Jax did, how to make herself pleasant and unobtrusive when the weather in the room turned. 6 years of lessons written into muscle and nerve. She thought about what it might take to unlearn them. That afternoon, when Emily was napping and the house was quiet, she found Antonio in the hallway outside the library with a folder of something he'd been reading, and she stopped him. "I want to understand," she said. "This house, the security, the men at the gate. I'm living inside something I don't fully understand, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. Can you explain it to me? Not the details, just the shape of it." He looked at her. Then he nodded and he took her into the library, and for the next 2 hours he explained. With the same flat precision he applied to everything: the shape of the world he inhabited, the territories and the relationships and the balance of power that required constant maintenance, the rules, and there were rules, a complex architecture of obligation and loyalty and consequence that governed everything, the things he would not do and the things he had done, and where the line between them fell and why. She didn't flinch from any of it. She asked questions when she needed to, precise and direct, and he answered them the same way. And at the end of 2 hours, she sat back in the chair across from him and looked at her hands. "You've hurt people," she said. "Yes." "And you've protected people." "Yes." "Are those 2 things, are they in balance for you? Do you think about it that way?" He was quiet for a moment. "I used to think that the question of balance was a luxury for people who didn't have to make the decisions I made, that the only relevant thing was whether the people I was responsible for were safe. And now? Now I think that was a way of avoiding a harder question." He looked at her. "I don't have a clean answer for you, Lena. I can't tell you that what I do is good. I can tell you that within my world, I operate with a code that I hold to, and I can tell you that certain things involving children, involving people who have no part in the decisions, I won't do. I've lost business over it. I've lost alliances over it. I hold to it anyway." "Because of Sophia," she said. "Because of Sophia," he confirmed. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment.
not assessing in the way she'd once assessed Jack, not looking for danger, reading the room, running the calculations of self-preservation, just looking at him. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You asked honestly. You deserved an honest answer." Jack never gave me honest answers about anything. I didn't know until I got outside of it how much energy I spent filling in all the blanks he left. What kind of blanks? Where did he go when he didn't come home? Why certain conversations would end in a way that didn't make sense unless you understood things he hadn't told me. Whether the money he told me we didn't have was real, or whether it was a way of keeping me from having resources of my own. She stopped. I know the answer to that last one now. I found out during the legal proceedings. He wasn't struggling. He was managing me. Antonio's jaw tightened very slightly, the first time she'd seen something that looked like anger on his face related to Jack. "I'm not surprised," he said. "Neither am I now," she said. "But I was then. I gave him the benefit of every doubt for years. I made myself believe the explanations because the alternative was understanding what the explanations were for." She looked out the window. "I think some part of me knew. I just couldn't afford to know it." "Survival instinct," Antonio said. "Yes," she said. "We keep coming back to that." "It's what kept you alive long enough to get here," he said. She looked at him then, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. On the 8th day, Emily had a conversation with Antonio over breakfast that Lena pretended not to be listening to. It started because Emily wanted to know about the books in the study, specifically the one on the bottom shelf with the blue spine that she had been looking at but not touching, because Elena had told her to ask first about the books. "That's an atlas," Antonio told her. "What's an atlas?" "A book of maps, every country in the world." Emily absorbed this. "All of them?" "Most of them." "Can I look at it?" "Yes." There was a pause while Emily ate 3 more bites of toast with the focused efficiency she brought to all tasks. Then, "What's your favorite country?" Another pause. Lena, at the coffee machine, did not turn around. "I haven't thought about that," Antonio said. "Mine is penguins," Emily said. "Penguins are animals, not a country." "I know," Emily said. "But wherever penguins live, that's my favorite. Is that a country?" "Antarctica," he said. "It's a continent. No country owns it." "Who lives there besides penguins?" "Scientists, researchers, people who study ice." "That sounds cold," Emily said. "It is." "Is it colder than the snow where you found us?" The briefest pause. "Yes," he said. "Much colder." "I don't think I want to go there then," Emily said, "even for the penguins." More toast. "Can we look at the atlas after breakfast? You can show me where Antarctica is." "If you want," he said. "I want," Emily confirmed. When Lena finally turned from the coffee machine, Antonio was looking at the table with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the closed calculation she'd come to recognize, or the careful watchfulness. Something older and quieter than that. Something that looked, for just a moment, like a man finding his way back from somewhere very far. She didn't say anything. She sat down and poured her coffee and pretended she hadn't seen it. But she had seen it. Like what you're hearing? If this story is hitting you in the right places, do us a favor. Like this video so more people can find it. Leave a comment below and tell us which moment got you the most. And if you really want to support what we do, there's a link in the description where you can buy us a cup of coffee. Every single one means we can keep making stories like this one. Now, back to Lena. On the 11th night, Jack found the estate. He didn't arrive alone. He brought a lawyer and 2 men whose purpose was obvious to anyone familiar with the visual language of intimidation. And he stood at the gate in a coat that cost more than Lena's monthly grocery budget and demanded to speak with whoever owned the property regarding his wife and daughter, which he said with the particular ownership in his voice that she had learned to hear the way other people heard thunder, as a signal to take cover. Marcos called Antonio's phone. Antonio took the call in the hallway outside the room where Lena was sleeping. He listened for 7 seconds, said 3 words, ended the call. He came into the room and turned on the lamp. Lena was already awake. "He's here," she said, not a question. "Yes." She sat up. In the weeks she'd been here, the last of the shock had worked its way out of her body and been replaced by something steadier. The pallor was gone. The baby had dropped slightly in the way babies did when they were beginning their approach. She looked like herself in a way she hadn't looked in years, which was to say that she looked like someone who had opinions. "What do you want to do?" Antonio asked. "I want to talk to him," she said. Antonio looked at her steadily. "You don't have to."
"I know," she said. "I want to." She met his eyes. "He needs to hear me say it. Not from behind a lawyer or a closed gate. I need him to hear me say it to his face. I've spent 6 years afraid of his face, and I need to take that back." A long moment. "All right," he said. "I'll be there." "You'll be behind me," she said. "Not in front of me. This is mine." He nodded once. Understood. They brought Jack into the front room. Not a meeting room, but a room with good lighting and the kind of furniture that communicated in the language of money, which was the language Jack respected most. He came in with his coat still on and his lawyer beside him and his 2 large companions behind, and he stopped when he saw Lena standing in the middle of the room. He hadn't expected her to be standing. He'd expected, Lena thought, to find her seated and frightened and small. He'd expected the Lena he'd been building for 6 years. He looked at her for a moment. Then his eyes moved to Antonio, who stood to the side and back, arms at his sides, watching with the still attention of someone who has decided exactly how much they will intervene and is waiting to see if the decision needs revision. "Lena," Jack said, "this is done. You come home." "No," Lena said. He blinked. The word apparently did not compute. "Excuse me?" "I'm not coming home. I'm not coming back. We're done, Jack." "You're my wife," he said. "You're carrying my child. You come home." "You drove me and Emily out to a highway in a blizzard and left us to die," she said. Her voice was level. She had been practicing this voice her whole life without knowing what she was practicing it for. "You left us in the snow, and you drove away, and you didn't come back. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You left me to die in the snow with your pregnant wife and your 5-year-old daughter, and you didn't come back." His jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." "I have hypothermia records," she said. "I have a doctor who examined me that night, and again every day since. I have Emily, who watched you leave, who can say in her own 5-year-old words exactly what happened." She paused. "I have myself, and I'm telling you, I'm not afraid of you anymore, Jack." Something moved through his face that she recognized, the shift from the public version of himself to the one that only came out at home, the one she'd spent years trying to manage and predict and accommodate. "You think this man is going to protect you?" he said, his voice dropping. "You know who he is. You know what he does. You think you're safer here than with me?" "I know I'm alive here," she said. "When I was with you, I was managing your moods and your hands and your idea of who I was supposed to be, and I was shrinking myself into smaller and smaller shapes to fit into the space you left for me. And eventually there wasn't going to be anything left." She took a breath. "That's not a marriage. That's an occupation." His face changed. "Lena." "No." She stepped forward. Not toward him. She wasn't reaching for him. She was taking back the room. "You're going to hear me say this. I'm filing for divorce. I'm going to file for full custody of both children, and I'm going to tell every court that asks exactly what happened on that road, and exactly what the years before that road looked like. And you're going to let it happen, because the alternative is that this becomes very public and very detailed, and you have things in your life, Jack, that you do not want examined in public." He stared at her. "Your lawyer can call my lawyer," she said. "I'm going to get one." Jack's eyes went to Antonio, a long, measuring look. Antonio returned it without expression,
without moving, without any of the energy that men put into these standoffs to establish position. He simply looked back, and his stillness was more communicative than any posturing would have been. It said, "There is no version of tonight where this ends differently than she has decided it will end." "This isn't over," Jack said. "Yes," Lena said. "It is." The lawyer said something low in Jack's ear. Jack's jaw worked. He looked at Lena one more time with the look she recognized from 100 nights in 100 rooms, the look that said, "I haven't decided this is finished." And she looked back at him, and she was not afraid. Not because Antonio was in the room, not because she was surrounded by a household of people who would do what Antonio said, but because she had been in the snow and she had counted the reasons to stay, and they had all been for Emily and the baby and herself, and Jack had not been on the list. And she understood now that the fear was the last thing he had left of her, and she was not giving it back. He left. He left. The door closed with a soft finality, and the room exhaled. Marcos, who had been present in the way that Marcos was always present, necessary, unobtrusive, completely attentive, looked at Antonio. Antonio looked at the space where Jack had been. Then he looked at Lena. She was still standing in the center of the room. Her hands had stopped shaking. She was looking at the door with the expression of someone who has just run a very long race and has not yet processed that it's over. "He'll talk to his lawyer tonight," she said. "He'll find a way to reframe this." "Let him," Antonio said. "His lawyer already knows what the legal landscape looks like. He's been very clearly advised." "He's going to tell people I left him," she said. "He's going to tell the story in a way that makes him the person something was done to." "He will," Antonio agreed, "and your story will be on record with a judge and a doctor and a 5-year-old who watched the whole thing and will tell anyone who asks exactly what happened, because Emily, as we know, tells the truth at all times and at significant length." Lena made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, not yet, but adjacent to one. "She really does," she said. "She gets it from her mother," Antonio said. She looked at him. Something in the room shifted slightly, the particular atmospheric change that happened between them sometimes, that thing neither of them was naming yet, the pressure of it settling into the air. She went to find her daughter. The room was very quiet after the door closed. Antonio said, from where he stood, "Are you all right?" Lena turned. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them, faintly surprised, as if the shaking was happening to someone else. "Yes," she said. "Then, no, both." She looked up. "He's going to fight this." "He'll find fighting expensive," Antonio said. The implication was not subtle. I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask," he said. "Go upstairs. Get some sleep." He paused. "You were remarkable." She looked at him. "I mean that," he said. She believed him. 3 days after Jack's visit, Lena went into labor. It started in the early morning, the way first labors often did with their younger siblings, not with the drama of water breaking and urgent timing, but with a slow, persistent gathering that built over hours into something that could not be ignored. Elena noticed before Lena admitted it, because Elena noticed most things, and Dr. Vasquez was called, and the room was prepared, and the house shifted into a particular focused quiet. Antonio stayed on the other side of the house. It wasn't his place, and he knew it, and he didn't pretend otherwise. But he didn't go to his office. He didn't take calls. He sat in the study with the atlas Emily had left open on the table to the page of Antarctica, and he waited. Emily was allowed to sit on the other side of the door because she was Emily, and no one had yet found a way to successfully prevent Emily from being in a given location once she had decided to be there. She sat with her back against the wall and her feet straight out, and her purple hat on, which she wore indoors now, with the same commitment she gave to all her decisions. 40 years later, Lena would tell people that her son arrived into the world loudly and immediately, like someone who had been trying to make a point for 9 months and finally had the platform for it. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, 10 fingers and 10 toes, and a set of lungs that were clearly not satisfied with the room they'd been given and were prepared to ask for more. She named him Lucas. When Dr. Vasquez came to tell Antonio, he found him standing in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular, and said simply, "Mother and son, both healthy." Antonio nodded. He said nothing for a moment, then he said, "And Emily?" "Asleep outside the door," the doctor said, utterly unimpressed with the concept of bedtime. Antonio walked down the hall to where Emily was slumped against the wall, hat slightly askew, asleep with the total commitment of children who go down like they've been switched off. He stood there looking at her for a moment. Then he did something he hadn't done in years, which was to pick up a sleeping child and carry her to bed. Emily didn't wake. She was small and warm, and she smelled of lavender soap Elena kept in the upstairs bathrooms, and she put one hand against his chest in her sleep with the casual trust of someone who had already decided you were safe. And Antonio walked very carefully down the hallway with her, and did not let himself think about Sophia, then thought about Sophia, and breathed through it, and kept walking. He put her in the bed and pulled the blanket up, and turned off the light, and stood in the door for a moment. Then he went back to the study and opened the atlas and sat down. In the weeks that followed, the manor settled into a rhythm that none of them had planned, and none of them were willing to examine too closely for fear of dislodging it. Lena recovered from birth with the focused efficiency she'd been bringing to recovery for years, because recovery was something she'd had practice at, though this time what she was recovering from and into was entirely different from anything she'd known before. Lucas was a loud, demanding baby who slept in 4-hour intervals and had opinions about everything, which Lena said meant he was going to be absolutely exhausting to parent and absolutely fine as a human being. Emily treated him with a maternal authority that both cracked Lena up and worried her slightly. Alina had already determined exactly how the household adjusted to an infant and had adjusted accordingly. And Antonio, who had ordered the household restructured around a woman and 2 children he'd found in a snowstorm, found himself eating dinner at 6 instead of 9 and having opinions about whether the baby's bassinet should go next to the window and knowing exactly what Emily did and didn't like on her toast. He noticed all of this. He noticed it the way a person notices that a room has changed while they weren't looking, with the particular combination of surprise and recognition that came when something unfamiliar had become, without announcement, simply the way things were. He and Lena had a conversation about it, because things between them had reached the point where the conversations they weren't having had become louder than the ones they were. It was evening. Emily was in bed. Lucas was asleep in the way newborns were when they'd exhausted themselves with opinions and had surrendered to unconsciousness with the same intensity they'd brought to everything else. Lena was in the sitting room by the fire, which was where she ended up most evenings, and Antonio came in and sat across from her, and they looked at each other in the particular way of 2 people who have reached an understanding they haven't yet spoken. "You know what's happening," Lena said. "Yes," he said. "I need to say something about that." "Go ahead." She looked at the fire. She had the baby weight still, and her hair was different from when he'd first found her. She'd had Elena help her cut it shorter, a decision she'd explained to no one, but that felt like it meant something, and she looked steadier than anyone had a right to look after everything she'd been through. "I came from a man who I thought loved me and who used love as a tool," she said. "He used it to manage me and contain me and keep me from building anything that wasn't about him. And I spent years undoing the damage of that, and I'm not done undoing it." She paused. "I'm not in a place where I can—" "I know," Antonio said. "I'm not saying no," she said. He looked at her. "I'm saying not yet," she said. "I'm saying I need—" She stopped. "I need to find out who I am when nobody is watching. I need to build something for myself and the children that's mine, not Jack's and not yours. Mine." She looked at him. "Can you understand that?" "Yes," he said. "I understand that better than most things." "And you're not—" She paused. "You're not going to make this complicated." "No," he said. "I'm not." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're a good man," she said. "I know you don't think so, but—" "I've done things," he said. "I know. I'm not asking you to be other than what you are. I'm saying that the part of you that I can see, that I've seen in this house, with Emily and with me—" She stopped. "That part is good, whatever else there is." He was very still. You're the only person who has said that to me in 20 years, and said it the way people say things that they have kept in a place with no air for a very long time. Then you've been around the wrong people, she said. Outside, the snow had started again. It fell soft and quiet against the windows, not the driving, furious blizzard of the night they'd met, but the other kind of snow, the kind that was just weather, just winter, just the world going on with its seasonal business in complete indifference to human arrangements. Lena watched it fall. "I'm going to be okay," she said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't really addressed to him. It was the kind of thing you said when you'd been afraid to believe it for long enough that saying it out loud felt necessary to make it real. "Yes," Antonio said. "You are. And the children. And the children." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for the road, for the house, for all of it." "You would have found your way," he said. "Maybe, but not as fast." Before we get to the ending, here's a quick note from us. If this story has moved you, touched something real, please consider supporting the channel. There's a link in the description to buy us a cup of coffee. Every contribution keeps this work going and lets us keep bringing these stories to you. And if you're enjoying it, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Now let's get to the end.
Spring came, and with it the particular thaw that changed everything. Not just temperature, but atmosphere. The sense of possibility that arrived with the first real warmth. The way the light lay differently on the snow-covered fields before the snow itself gave up and became water and the world went green. Lena's lawyer had been in contact with Jack's lawyer for 2 months by then. The proceedings were going the way Antonio had suggested they might, expensively for Jack. There had been a hearing about emergency custody, and Lena had sat in a courtroom and told the truth with the flat, precise voice she'd spent years developing, and the judge had listened, and the children had been in her custody since. Lucas was 10 weeks old and still had opinions about everything. Emily had started kindergarten at the school in town, which she had informed them was good but could be better, and she had some specific recommendations regarding the snack situation. On a Tuesday afternoon in early April, Lena stood in the garden at the side of the estate where Elena had, apparently, maintained a kitchen garden through the winter, and she turned the soil with a hand trowel and felt the give of earth that had been frozen and was frozen no longer. She heard Antonio come out of the house behind her, but didn't turn around. He came and stood beside her. He was in shirt sleeves, which was the closest she'd ever seen him to undressed. He looked at the garden. "Elena says she'll plant tomatoes here in 3 weeks," he said. "Good," Lena said. She turned another patch of soil. "I've been thinking," she said, "about staying." He was very still. "Not because I have nowhere to go," she said. "I have somewhere to go. I have enough from the preliminary settlement to get an apartment, to set up a real life. I'm not staying because I need to." She paused. "I'm thinking about staying because I want to, because this feels—" She stopped. "Because the children are happy here. Because Emily thinks of Elena as a second grandmother and has started teaching Lucas the word for penguin, even though he can't do anything with that information for approximately a year." She looked up. "And because I've been asking myself every day for the last month what I want, now that I'm allowed to ask. And the answer keeps being this, here, near you." Antonio looked at her. "I'm not saying," she started. "I know what you're saying," he said. "You're not saying anything," she observed. "I'm trying to say it correctly," he said. "I've been practicing." Something warm moved through her that she recognized now, not the performing warmth of someone who was afraid of what happened if the warmth stopped, but the real thing, the kind that came from choosing rather than from fear. "Well?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment with those dark eyes that had spent 20 years giving nothing away. "Stay," he said. Just the one word, but he said it the way that people said things they had wanted to say for a long time and had kept waiting for the right moment, and finally decided that the right moment was when it was true, and it was true. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. They stood in the garden while the spring moved around them, and from inside the house came the sound of Emily apparently explaining to Lucas, in extensive detail, that penguins could not fly but could swim very fast, which was different but equally good, and Lucas responded in the non-specific but enthusiastic vowel sounds of a 10-week-old who was choosing, as he would continue to choose throughout his life, to meet the world with maximum volume. Antonio looked at the house, at the window where Elena's shape moved in the kitchen, at the garden beginning to shift from brown to the first faint possibility of green. Lena looked at him. She had spent 6 years loving someone who used her love against her, and years before that not knowing the difference between love and need, and she had been in the snow and she had survived, and she had stood in a room and taken herself back, and now she was here, in a garden in spring, choosing. You're going to be terrible at this, the domesticity of it. Emily has a lot of questions, and Lucas is going to be noisy for approximately 3 years, and... I know, he said. He was almost smiling. Almost. It was a thing he did now, occasionally, this almost smile, and every time it appeared it seemed to mean a little more. You're going to have to learn what the snack situation is, she said. I'll learn, he said. She has strong opinions. She comes by them honestly. Lena laughed. She hadn't been expecting to laugh. It came up through her chest and out into the April air, and it was real and unguarded and absolutely hers. He looked at her when she laughed. He looked at her the way people looked at things they had stopped believing were possible and had been proven wrong about. There's a thing that happens to people who have been in the cold long enough, a rewiring of expectation, a recalibration of what warmth means. It becomes not just a physical fact, but a moral one. You know, having been without it, what it means. You do not take it for granted. Lena had been cold in ways that had nothing to do with weather. She had been cold inside a marriage that looked warm from outside, in rooms where the temperature was technically fine and she was freezing anyway. She had been so cold for so long that she had forgotten it could be any different, and then she had been literally, physically, actually dying in the snow, and someone had stopped. She did not think this made it simple. She did not think that love, whatever this was becoming, whatever it would grow into, was uncomplicated by his world, or her past, or the very real work still ahead of her. She would have days when the old reflexes fired without warning, and she would pull away from kindness, because kindness had once been a tactic. And he would have days when the weight of everything he'd done and lost would make him unreachable. None of that was going to be easy, but she had learned, finally, that easy and worth it were not the same thing. She had learned that the thing that healed you was not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of something real. Emily was real. Lucas was real. This garden was real. This man standing beside her with his hands in his pockets and his almost smile and all his dark, complicated history. Real. She put the trowel down in the soil and stood up straight and looked at the sky. It was very blue, the kind of blue that only existed in early spring, when the air was still cold enough to make everything sharp, and the light was new and the world was in the business of beginning. I want to plant something, she said. Elena can tell you what grows here. Not her garden, Lena said. Mine. He looked at her. I want my own patch, she said, for me to tend. That isn't anyone else's. He said nothing, but he moved slightly, creating space on the south-facing wall that got the most sun, a deliberate repositioning that said, here, this is yours, without words. She looked at the space. Tomatoes, she said, and something with flowers. Stubborn, both of those, he said. Good, she said. So am I. She knelt down in the soil, and her hands went into the cold earth, and she felt, underneath the cold, the warmth that was always there beneath everything, the dark, patient warmth of ground that had survived the winter and was ready to grow. Emily came out the back door at a dead run, Lucas somehow already in her arms, despite being 10 weeks old and quite large for the experiment she was conducting. Mama, she called, running toward her. Mama, come look. Elena found a caterpillar. Lena stood up, earth on her hands. Coming, she called. She looked at Antonio once. He looked back. The almost smile arrived. She went to her daughter, and that was how it started. Not with the grand declaration or perfect moment,
but with a child running across a spring lawn toward her mother, and a man watching them both, and a garden waiting to be planted. They would build something here, in this strange and unlikely place. It would not look like anything anyone had planned. It would have complications and arguments, and the specific friction of people with histories learning to share space. There would be meetings Lena wouldn't ask about, and nights when Antonio disappeared into the other version of himself, the one that lived in the rooms she didn't go into. There would be times when Emily's questions cut directly to the center of things, and both adults would look at each other over her head and try to figure out what truth looked like at child height. But there would also be this: the sound of a family in the rooms of a house, the smell of a garden, a baby learning the word penguin from a 5-year-old who was absolutely certain of the importance of this, an evening fire, and a man and a woman who had both survived things they shouldn't have needed to survive, and who had found, in the surviving, that they were not alone. The world was full of blizzards. Some of them were weather. Some of them were people you loved who turned cold when you needed them warm. Some of them were the long gray years when you forgot what it meant to be fully yourself. And sometimes, very rarely, into the middle of your blizzard, something moved differently. Something stopped, and you were found.
"Tell me about the night you met Antonio," he said. Lena would look at her hands for a moment. She would think about a road in the dark and the snow coming down and the sound of Emily's voice through the howling. She would think about a man crouching beside her in a blizzard, 2 fingers at her throat, checking that she was still there. "It was cold," she said. "The coldest I've ever been." "And he found you?" "He stopped," she said. He could have kept driving. Anyone else might have kept driving and told themselves it wasn't their problem and been home in time for dinner. But he stopped. Lucas thought about this. "Why?" Lena smiled. "Ask him," she said. Lucas went to find Antonio, who was in the study with the atlas Emily had left open on the table years ago and never quite put back on the shelf. Lucas cornered him with the same confidence he brought to everything and asked his question. Antonio looked at him for a moment. He thought about a road in a blizzard, about 2 shapes in the headlights, about a child standing in the snow counting. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. Lucas frowned. That's not a real answer. Antonio looked at him. This boy who had arrived into the world in a room in this house, in a winter that had started with cold and ended with beginning. This boy who had his mother's eyes, and, it had to be said, his mother's complete unwillingness to accept insufficient explanations. "No," he said, "it's not." He closed the atlas. "Come sit down." Lucas sat. "I stopped," Antonio said, "because I saw your sister standing in the snow." He paused. "I stopped because she was counting. Did your mother ever tell you that?" "What was she counting?" "Seconds," he said. "After your father drove away. She stood in the snow and she counted, and she didn't stop counting. And when I got to her, she looked at me, and she asked if I was going to leave too." Lucas was very quiet. "She was 5 years old," Antonio said. "She was standing in a blizzard, and she asked me if I was going to leave. What did you tell her?" "I told her no. And then you didn't." "And then I didn't." Lucas sat with this for a moment. Outside the window, the garden that had started with 1 trowel and 1 patch of south-facing wall had grown considerably over the years, with tomatoes and roses and 1 spectacularly ambitious climbing plant that had reached the 2nd floor and showed no signs of stopping. "I'm glad you stopped," Lucas said. Antonio looked at this child who was 9 years old and utterly, completely real. "So am I," he said. "True love isn't perfect. It isn't clean or simple or free of the weight of everything that came before. It is, at its heart, an act of stopping, of choosing in the middle of the storm to stop and look and reach out a hand. It is 2 people saying, 'I see you. I'm not leaving.' It is a child in the snow who kept counting. It is a garden in spring. It is all the ways you rebuild yourself after the cold, and all the ways you let someone else help you do it." The screen fades to black, and the words remain, "True love isn't perfect. It's healing." That's the end of today's story. Thank you so much for spending this hour with Lena, Antonio, Emily, and little Lucas. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe, like the video, leave us a comment with your favorite moments, and consider supporting us by buying a cup of coffee through the link in the description.
Your support is how we keep telling stories like this one. We'll see you in the next one.